The marketplace of Somersetshire bustled with its usual Saturday vigour, yet the whispers followed Miss Eleanor Vale like persistent shadows. She stood before a modest flower stall, her blue dress, 3 seasons old and meticulously maintained, catching the morning light as she selected a small bundle of violets. 5 pence for the daughter of a penniless clergyman. Perhaps she might offer prayers instead, came the audible murmur from Lady Octavia Blackmere, whose crimson silk rustled as she turned to her companions. Their tittering laughter rose above the market din, unmistakable in its cruelty. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly around the coin purse, but her posture remained impeccable, the proud carriage of her shoulders betraying nothing of the humiliation that burned within her breast. The flower seller, a weathered woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Pay them no mind, Miss Vale. Their hearts are as empty as their heads are full." "Thank you, Mrs. Finch," Eleanor replied softly, accepting the modest bouquet with a gentle smile. "These shall brighten father's grave admirably." She turned to leave, her path necessarily crossing that of Lady Octavia's circle. With practiced grace, Eleanor inclined her head in acknowledgement, though no reciprocation was offered. Instead, Lady Octavia's voice cut through the morning air with brutal precision. "They say the Reverend Vale left nothing but debts and disappointment. A clergyman who could not even secure his daughter's future. One wonders about the state of his soul." Eleanor froze, the words striking with the force of physical blows. Around them, the marketplace seemed to still, commerce momentarily suspended in anticipation of scandal. "She'll never marry without a dowry," continued Lady Octavia, examining her gloved hand with affected nonchalance. "Not a farthing to her name, and yet she carries herself as though entitled to respect." "A pity," agreed Mrs. Hargrove, a baron's wife of notorious meanness. "Beauty without fortune is like a flower without fragrance, decorative perhaps, but ultimately worthless." Eleanor's gaze remained fixed upon the cobblestones. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring, until a commanding voice severed it cleanly. "I find, Lady Octavia, that true worthlessness reveals itself through words rather than circumstances." The speaker stood at the periphery of the gathering, a tall figure in a perfectly tailored riding coat, his posture unmistakably that of nobility. Eleanor did not recognize him, but the sudden pallor of Lady Octavia's complexion suggested his identity was significant indeed. "Your Grace," Lady Octavia curtsied deeply, her previous hauteur dissolving into fawning deference. "We had not expected your return from Italy so soon. The county shall rejoice at your presence." "I return to attend to certain matters," he replied, his gaze passing over the assembled group before coming to rest upon Eleanor. "I find myself dismayed at the discourse I have encountered." Eleanor met his eyes briefly, a grey so deep it bordered on silver, before lowering her gaze appropriately. His attention, however fleeting, had transformed her from object of ridicule to subject of intense scrutiny. "Miss Vale," he continued, surprising her with the knowledge of her name, "might I accompany you to the churchyard? I wish to pay my respects to your father, whose sermons I remember from my youth." The marketplace fell silent. To refuse would be unthinkable, to accept scandalous. Eleanor's voice, when it came, was clear despite its softness. "You are most kind, Your Grace, but I should not wish to delay your business in town." "There is no business more pressing than respect for the departed," he countered smoothly. He offered his arm, a gesture witnessed by 24 pairs of widening eyes. Eleanor hesitated for only a moment before placing her gloved fingertips lightly upon his sleeve. As he led her away from the shocked onlookers, she could feel the heat of speculation igniting behind them. "I fear you have provided the county with conversation for a fortnight, sir," she murmured, once they had gained some distance. "Let them speak," he replied, his voice carrying a note of steel beneath its cultured tones. "I am Alaric Pembroke, Duke of Ashbourne." "I know who you are, Your Grace," Eleanor acknowledged. "What I cannot fathom is why the wealthiest peer in the county would intervene on behalf of a penniless clergyman's daughter." The Duke's pace slowed as they approached the lane that led to St. Michael's churchyard. He turned slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made Eleanor's heart quicken, despite her composure. "Perhaps, Miss Vale, because I find myself increasingly weary of a society that values guineas over goodness." The wind caught at Eleanor's skirts as a church bell tolled in the distance. 3 chimes, then silence. In that moment, something shifted between them, fragile as the violets clutched in her hand, profound as the graves they approached. "They will never forgive you for such a public display," she warned. "And they shall never forgive you for inspiring it," he countered. "Shall we proceed to the churchyard, Miss Vale?" The crisp spring air carried the scent of distant rain as Eleanor nodded her assent. Neither could know that behind them, Lady Octavia watched with cold eyes, her gloved hand crushing the lace of her parasol. The seal of fate had been broken, its wax still warm. The late Reverend Vale's headstone stood modest, but dignified amidst the churchyard's older monuments. Eleanor knelt upon the damp grass, heedless of her dress, and arranged the violets with practiced care. The Duke of Ashbourne remained a respectful distance behind, hat held against his chest, his tall figure casting a long shadow in the morning light. "He was a man of genuine faith," Alaric observed quietly. "I remember his Christmas sermon from my boyhood, on the virtue of simplicity, most unusual for a clergyman to preach against extravagance to an audience of landowners." Eleanor glanced up, surprise evident in her expression. "You truly remember him?" "I remember those who speak truth without regard for consequence." He stepped forward, examining the inscription. "Arthur Vale, 1782-1823. Faith without works is dead." A fitting epitaph. "He lived by those words," Eleanor replied, rising to her feet and brushing soil from her gloves. "Though his works left us with little worldly comfort." The wind stirred the branches of a nearby yew, dappling the graves with shifting patterns of light. In the distance, the spire of St. Michael's pierced a sky growing heavy with clouds. "Your brother, Edwin, I believe. He studies at Cambridge." "You are remarkably well informed, Your Grace," Eleanor observed, a note of wariness entering her voice. Alaric's mouth curved slightly. "Somersetshire remains my responsibility, despite my travels. I make it my business to know of promising young men from my county. Then you know we subsist on the charity of distant relations and whatever I might earn through music lessons." Her chin lifted almost imperceptibly. "Edwin's education depletes what little remained of mother's jewels." The Duke's gaze sharpened. "Yet you wear no ornament save dignity, Miss Vale." "Dignity costs nothing, Your Grace, yet seems in shorter supply than diamonds." A moment of silence stretched between them, broken only by the mournful call of a blackbird. Alaric Pembroke seemed to arrive at some private decision. "Would you walk with me through the churchyard? There is a matter I wish to discuss." Eleanor hesitated, glancing toward the church where several parishioners had gathered for morning prayers. Their attention was unmistakably focused on the unusual pair among the gravestones. "More fodder for gossip, I fear," she murmured. "Let them feast," he replied with quiet intensity. "Their hunger for scandal merely reveals their starvation of spirit." They walked slowly between the weathered headstones, maintaining a distance that propriety might barely countenance. The Duke kept his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze directed forward. "I knew your father not only through his sermons," he began, "but through certain charitable works he undertook on behalf of tenants at Ashbourne Park. He never sought recognition." "Recognition was not his purpose," Eleanor replied. "Comfort for the afflicted was reward enough." A philosophy increasingly foreign to our age. The Duke stopped beside an ancient oak that spread gnarled branches over a cluster of graves. "I have recently established a foundation for the education of deserving young women without financial means." Eleanor's steps faltered. "Indeed?" "The trustees require a governess of impeccable character and sufficient accomplishment." He turned to face her directly, his expression grave. "I would propose your name for consideration." The offer hung between them like fragile crystal. Eleanor's fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirts, her mind racing through implications and consequences. "You offer charity disguised as employment, Your Grace." "I offer appropriate compensation for valuable service," he countered. "Your reputation for musical instruction is considerable, despite Lady Octavia's efforts to diminish it." A flush of color touched Eleanor's cheeks. "You know of that as well. 3 families dismissed you upon her suggestion that your influence might prove unsuitable for impressionable young ladies." His voice carried a dangerous undercurrent. Calumny whispered beneath the guise of concern. Eleanor drew a sharp breath. "It is the way of the world. Those without fortune must accept such injustices." "Must they?" Alaric's eyes narrowed. "I find myself increasingly unwilling to accept the dictates of a society that measures worth by inheritance rather than character." The church bell chimed quarter hour, its resonance rippling across the hallowed ground. Eleanor studied the Duke's face, searching for mockery or condescension and finding neither. "Your position would enable you to change such circumstances for many," she acknowledged carefully. "Mine permits only endurance." "Perhaps." Alaric reached into his waistcoat and withdrew a sealed letter. "Nevertheless, I ask you to consider the proposal. The foundation begins its work next month. Your answer may be directed to my solicitor, Mr. Harding." Eleanor accepted the letter with gloved fingers, noting the heavy wax seal bearing the Ashbourne crest, a falcon with outstretched wings. "Your Grace, while I am grateful for your consideration, I must ask, why me? Surely there are women of greater connection and influence who might serve your cause." The Duke's expression remained impassive, yet something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that belied his formal demeanor. Connection and influence are precisely what the Foundation seeks to overcome, Miss Vale. I require someone who understands the weight of circumstance upon potential. From the church came the sound of doors opening, voices emerging into the spring air. Their time alone had drawn to its natural conclusion. "I shall consider your offer with all seriousness," Eleanor promised, tucking the letter into her reticule. As they walked toward the churchyard gate, Mrs. Dorothea Langley approached, her widow's weeds immaculate despite their age. She curtsied to the Duke with practiced grace. "Your Grace, what a pleasure to see you return to Somersetshire. I trust Italy proved illuminating." "In unexpected ways, Mrs. Langley," he replied with a respectful bow. "Miss Vale has been kind enough to acquaint me with her father's resting place." Mrs. Langley's shrewd eyes moved between them, assessing with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. "How fortunate that your paths should cross this morning." "Fortune favours the observant," remarked the Duke. "I bid you both good day. Miss Vale, I await your response with interest." He departed with measured strides, his tall figure soon disappearing beyond the lich gate. Mrs. Langley immediately turned to Eleanor, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "My dear, you are the object of every gaze from the church door to the market square. What has transpired?" Eleanor's fingers pressed against the letter in her reticule. She could feel its weight, heavier than mere paper and wax should be. "I hardly know," she confessed softly, "but I believe, Mrs. Langley, that the winds may be changing direction." Behind them, unnoticed, a small blue ribbon had come loose from Eleanor's dress, carried by the breeze to settle upon the grave of Arthur Vale. As they turned to leave, a shadow fell across the churchyard once more. The Duke of Ashbourne had returned, his gaze fixed upon the flutter of blue against stone. He bent to retrieve it, tucking the ribbon carefully into his waistcoat pocket before anyone might witness the gesture. The drawing-room of Ivy Cottage, Mrs. Langley's modest residence where Eleanor had found shelter after her father's death, glowed with late afternoon sunlight. Eleanor sat before an open pianoforte, her fingers moving gracefully across yellowed keys as her young pupil, 12-year-old Sophia Winters, watched with earnest concentration. "Your progress delights me, Miss Winters," Eleanor said, concluding the demonstration with a gentle flourish. 2 weeks of diligent practice has wrought considerable improvement." The girl beamed, her freckled face alight with pleasure. "Mother says music is the soul's arithmetic, Miss Vale." "A lovely sentiment," Eleanor replied, adjusting the sheet music. "Mathematics given voice and feeling." A discreet knock interrupted their exchange. Mrs. Langley entered, her expression carefully composed. "Miss Winters, your mother's carriage has arrived somewhat early. Perhaps you might gather your music while I speak briefly with Miss Vale?" Once the girl had moved to the far corner, Mrs. Langley lowered her voice. "Eleanor, you have received another invitation for tomorrow's assembly at Blackmere Hall." Eleanor's hands stilled upon the pianoforte. "Surely there is some mistake. Lady Blackmere made her feelings regarding my presence quite clear after the market incident." The invitation arrived by special messenger, with the Blackmere seal intact. Mrs. Langley's eyes held a mixture of concern and calculation. "It seems the Countess has experienced a remarkable change of heart, or perhaps a change of circumstance." Understanding dawned upon Eleanor's features. "The Duke of Ashbourne." "Indeed." Mrs. Langley seated herself beside Eleanor on the narrow bench. "His return has set every drawing-room astir with speculation. That he chose to publicly acknowledge you has forced Lady Blackmere's hand," Eleanor finished softly. "She cannot risk offending the county's most powerful peer." "Precisely so." Mrs. Langley studied Eleanor's profile. "The question remains, will you attend?" Eleanor's fingers traced the worn edges of the pianoforte keys, her thoughts churning beneath her composed expression. To refuse would appear ungracious. To accept invites further scrutiny, and perhaps opportunity, Mrs. Langley suggested gently. Eleanor withdrew the Duke's letter from her pocket, where it had remained since their churchyard meeting 3 days prior. The seal remained unbroken, its wings spread in silent challenge. "I have not yet replied to His Grace's proposal. Then perhaps tomorrow's assembly might provide occasion for discussion." Mrs. Langley rose as young Sophia approached with her collected music sheets. "Consider it carefully, my dear. Doors long closed may be opening." After Sophia's departure, Eleanor retreated to the small bedchamber that had become her sanctuary. The space held little beyond necessities: a narrow bed, a washstand, and a writing desk positioned to capture the western light. Upon the wall hung a single adornment, her father's clerical collar framed in simple wood. She opened the Duke's letter with careful fingers, breaking the winged seal. The contents proved succinct yet eloquent. Formal terms of employment, generous compensation, and a handwritten postscript in bold, slanting script. "Character, not circumstance, shall be our foundation's cornerstone." Eleanor placed the letter upon her small writing desk and moved to the window, gazing toward the distant spires of Blackmere Hall. Tomorrow she would enter that formidable house not as a supplicant, but as a guest, albeit one whose invitation stemmed from calculation rather than goodwill. The following evening arrived with unseasonable clarity, stars pricking the velvet darkness above Mrs. Langley's borrowed carriage. Eleanor wore her blue dress, the same that had drawn Lady Octavia's mockery, though Mrs. Langley had insisted on adding fresh lace at the collar and cuffs, lending it modest refreshment. "Remember," Mrs. Langley murmured as the carriage approached the illuminated facade of Blackmere Hall, "you enter as the equal of any person within these walls. Circumstance may vary, dignity need not." Eleanor squeezed her companion's gloved hand in silent gratitude. "Your friendship has been my sanctuary, Mrs. Langley." The entrance hall blazed with candlelight, reflecting from polished marble and the jewels of assembled guests. The Countess of Blackmere received them with brittle courtesy, her eyes cold despite her practiced smile. "Miss Vale, how unexpected to have you grace our modest gathering." Her gaze lingered pointedly on Eleanor's refreshed but familiar gown. "Your gracious invitation could not be refused, Lady Blackmere," Eleanor replied with perfect composure. "Such kindness deserves recognition." They moved into the ballroom, where conversation momentarily faltered as heads turned to observe their entrance. Eleanor felt the weight of collective scrutiny, some curious, others openly hostile. Lady Octavia stood among a cluster of fashionable young women, her golden curls arranged in elaborate coils beneath a diamond tiara. "She wears the same dress," came a stage whisper clearly intended to carry, "like a uniform of misfortune." Eleanor maintained her serene expression, though her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. Mrs. Langley guided her toward chairs positioned along the periphery, where they might observe without standing as objects of inspection. "Courage, my dear," the older woman murmured. "Remember why you came." The assembly proceeded through its established rhythms, dancing, conversation, carefully orchestrated social maneuvers. Eleanor noted that despite multiple inquiries, the Duke of Ashbourne had yet to make an appearance. Lady Octavia grew increasingly petulant as the evening advanced, her anticipated triumph seemingly postponed. During a brief lull between dances, Sir Reginald Pierce approached Eleanor's chair, a handsome man of dissipated countenance, known throughout the county for gambling debts and questionable honour. "Miss Vale," he drawled, executing an exaggerated bow, "might I entreat you to favour the company with a musical interlude? Lady Blackmere's pianoforte sits neglected, and I recall your skill is considerable." The request, phrased as flattery, carried subtle malice. To refuse would appear ungracious. To accept placed her on display. Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Mrs. Langley intervened. "Sir Reginald, how considerate of you to recognise Miss Vale's accomplishments. However, she plays only when emotion, rather than exhibition, is the purpose." Sir Reginald's smile tightened. "How disappointingly principled." As he retreated, Eleanor whispered, "Thank you for your intervention. I suspect Lady Octavia's influence in that request." "Undoubtedly." Mrs. Langley's gaze travelled toward the ballroom entrance, where a sudden shift in atmosphere had occurred. "Ah, it seems the evening's true commencement has arrived." The Duke of Ashbourne stood in the doorway, his evening attire emphasizing his commanding height and bearing. Conversation stilled as he made his formal bow to the Countess, whose expression transformed from barely concealed boredom to animated delight. "Your Grace, we had begun to fear some emergency had detained you." "Merely estate matters requiring attention, Lady Blackmere," his voice carried clearly across the hushed room. "I trust the assembly has proceeded agreeably." "It shall certainly improve with your presence," the Countess replied, gesturing toward her daughter. "Octavia has been practicing the pianoforte particularly for this occasion." The Duke acknowledged Lady Octavia with correct but minimal courtesy before his gaze swept the assembled company. When it settled on Eleanor, a subtle change altered his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his formal mien. "Miss Vale," he said, approaching her chair with deliberate steps, "I had hoped to encounter you this evening." Eleanor rose and curtsied, acutely aware of the collective intake of breath that rippled through the ballroom. "Your Grace, I trust you find yourself well?" "Improved by present company," he replied. Then, with a glance toward the open doors leading to the terrace, added, "The evening air proves refreshingly temperate. Perhaps you might favour me with conversation while we admire Lady Blackmere's gardens." The invitation, transparent in its purpose, yet impeccable in its propriety when Mrs. Langley rose to accompany them, caused Lady Octavia's cheeks to flush with angry colour. The Countess appeared momentarily stricken before recovering her social poise. "The western terrace offers the finest view, Your Grace," she managed, though her voice had thinned considerably. As they moved toward the terrace doors, Eleanor heard Lady Octavia's hissed whisper to Sir Reginald, "This humiliation shall not stand. Ensure it." The night air embraced them with gentle coolness, scented with late-blooming roses. Mrs. Langley maintained a discreet distance, close enough to satisfy propriety while allowing conversation a measure of privacy. "You received my letter," the Duke observed, his gaze fixed upon the formal gardens stretching into shadow. "I did, Your Grace." Eleanor's hands clasped before her, steadying her nerves. "The position you describe is both generous and meaningful, yet you hesitate. It was not a question. I wonder at the wisdom of accepting patronage that may be misconstrued." Eleanor turned slightly to face him. "Your public acknowledgement has already placed me in a precarious position." "You refer to the whispers within." His mouth curved into a sardonic smile. "Let them speculate. Their opinions matter less to me than autumn leaves." "Because you stand above them," Eleanor replied quietly. "I do not enjoy such elevation." The Duke studied her face in the silvered moonlight. "You fear accepting my foundation's offer would confirm their basest suspicions. Society requires little confirmation when scandal is the desired outcome," she acknowledged. Behind them, the strains of a waltz spilled through the open doors, along with bursts of laughter and conversation. The contrasting quietude of the terrace emphasized their separation from that glittering world. "I have a confession, Miss Vale," the Duke said after a contemplative silence. "The foundation exists as described. However, your nomination was not its primary purpose." Eleanor felt a chill unrelated to the evening air. "I don't understand." "I sought an appropriate reason to speak with you again." His directness startled her. Our churchyard conversation revealed a mind of remarkable clarity and character of uncommon strength. Before Eleanor could respond to this extraordinary statement, Mrs. Langley approached with uncharacteristic urgency. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption. Miss Vale is requested in the drawing-room most insistently." "By whom?" the Duke inquired, his expression sharpening. "Lady Blackmere herself," Mrs. Langley replied, her eyes communicating unspoken concern. "She mentioned something regarding a personal item found in suspicious circumstances." Eleanor felt a premonition of dread uncurl within her chest. "I shall attend her immediately." The Duke's hand moved slightly, as though he might reach for her arm, then returned to his side. "I shall accompany you." "Perhaps," Eleanor suggested with careful emphasis, "it would be best if I addressed the matter privately first." He inclined his head in acknowledgement, though his expression remained troubled. "As you wish, but I shall remain nearby." They re-entered the ballroom to discover an atmosphere transformed, the music silenced, the dancers stilled, all attention directed toward the drawing-room entrance, where the Countess of Blackmere stood with theatrical gravity. As Eleanor approached, Lady Octavia emerged from the drawing-room, her expression a perfect mask of reluctant distress. In her hand, she held a letter, its seal broken, its contents partially visible. "Miss Vale," the Countess announced, her voice pitched to carry throughout the assembled company. "A matter of some delicacy requires explanation." Eleanor stepped forward, dignity wrapped around her like armor. "I am at your service, Lady Blackmere." Behind her, the Duke of Ashbourne moved to follow, only to be detained by Sir Reginald with some urgent question. As Eleanor crossed the threshold into the drawing-room, the door closed firmly behind her, separating her from potential allies. Within the drawing-room, several letters lay spread upon a rosewood table. The Countess gestured toward them with cold precision. "Perhaps," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "you might explain the nature of your correspondence with certain gentlemen of questionable reputation." Eleanor glanced at the letters, bewilderment giving way to horror as she recognized neither the handwriting nor the signatures, yet saw her name invoked in terms of shocking impropriety. "These are not mine," she stated firmly. "I have never seen them before this moment." "How curious," Lady Octavia remarked, entering the room with silent steps. "They were discovered among your possessions in the ladies' withdrawing-room." The trap, so carefully laid, snapped shut with audible finality. Outside, the music resumed, a spirited country dance that masked the sound of Eleanor's reputation shattering like fine crystal upon marble. The drawing-room of Blackmere Hall had transformed into a tribunal, with Eleanor standing alone before her accusers. The letters spread across the rosewood table bore signatures of 3 different men, each claiming intimate acquaintance with a woman who had, in truth, never penned a single line to any of them. "I have written to none of these gentlemen," Eleanor stated, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "These letters are forgeries." "A convenient claim," the Countess remarked, lifting one page with gloved fingertips as though it might contaminate her. Yet they were found among your belongings, items I never placed there. Eleanor's gaze moved from the Countess to Lady Octavia, whose triumphant smile had been carefully arranged into an expression of pained concern. Consider your position, Miss Vale, Lady Blackmere continued. A young woman of no fortune, no connections, surviving on charity and the goodwill of your betters. How unfortunate that such goodwill might now be reconsidered. The door opened before Eleanor could respond, admitting the Duke of Ashbourne. His expression betrayed nothing, though the rigid set of his shoulders suggested carefully controlled anger. Lady Blackmere, he acknowledged with minimal courtesy. I find myself curious about this urgent matter that required Miss Vale's presence. The Countess hesitated, caught between her daughter's scheme and the county's most powerful peer. A private matter, Your Grace. Concerns of a delicate nature. Indeed. His gaze fell upon the scattered letters, so delicate they required immediate attention during an assembly, rather than discreet inquiry at an appropriate time. Lady Octavia stepped forward, her golden curls gleaming in the candlelight. Your Grace, we sought only to spare Miss Vale public embarrassment. These letters suggest improprieties that bear no resemblance to Miss Vale's character, he interrupted, his tone cutting through her practiced speech. Furthermore, they appear remarkably convenient for those who might wish her reputation diminished. The room fell silent. Eleanor stood motionless, watching as the Duke lifted one of the letters, examining its penmanship with critical attention. Curious, he remarked. The hand appears masculine, yet possesses flourishes distinctly feminine. His gaze shifted to Lady Octavia, whose complexion had paled noticeably. One might almost recognize certain distinctive curves to the capitals. Lady Blackmere moved to interpose herself. Your Grace, surely you cannot suggest— I suggest nothing, madam. His tone remained perfectly civil, belied only by the dangerous glint in his eyes. I merely observe that truth, like cream, inevitably rises to the surface. He turned to Eleanor, offering his arm with formal correctness. Miss Vale, Mrs. Langley expresses concern for your welfare. Might I escort you to her? Eleanor hesitated only momentarily before placing her fingertips upon his sleeve. You are most kind, Your Grace. As they departed, Lady Blackmere called after them, the letters remain regardless of speculation about their origin. The Duke paused at the threshold. Without turning, he replied, Indeed, as does my solicitor, who has particular expertise in comparing handwriting samples, including those in guest books and correspondence. Fascinating profession, the law. They crossed the ballroom, where speculation had transformed into open whispers. Mrs. Langley waited near the entrance, her face tight with concern. My carriage awaits, the Duke informed her. I suggested it might better serve Miss Vale's comfort than remaining until your own conveyance is called. Most considerate, Your Grace, Mrs. Langley replied, her shrewd gaze moving between them. Once settled within the luxurious confines of the Duke's carriage, Eleanor finally permitted herself a trembling breath. I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your intervention. No gratitude is necessary where justice is concerned, he replied, his voice controlled yet vibrating with suppressed anger. The orchestration was crude, though effective had it remained unchallenged. Lady Octavia has desired my humiliation since our introduction, Eleanor acknowledged, though I confess myself puzzled by the intensity of her animosity. The Duke's mouth curved into a humorless smile, perhaps because you possess what wealth cannot purchase. A threadbare blue dress and diminishing prospects? Eleanor attempted lightness, though her voice betrayed her. Dignity, authenticity, qualities increasingly rare in ballrooms and drawing rooms alike. They travelled in contemplative silence for several minutes, the rhythmic sound of hooves upon the country road oddly soothing after the evening's tumult. Eleanor gazed through the window at the moonlit landscape, gathering her composure. The damage is done, she finally said. Regardless of your Grace's intervention, the letter's existence will become common knowledge by morning. Let them talk, the Duke replied. Gossip, like spring rain, eventually gives way to clearer skies. You inhabit a different world, Your Grace, Eleanor said softly. For a woman in my position, reputation is the only treasure of value. Once tarnished, she left the sentence unfinished. The carriage slowed as they approached Ivy Cottage, its modest outline silvered by moonlight. Before they came to a complete stop, the Duke spoke again, his tone reflective. During my time in Italy, I encountered a sculptor working on a commission for a wealthy patron. The marble, rare, flawless Carrara, had been damaged during transport. A crack, hairline but visible, marred its surface. Eleanor turned from the window, drawn by the unexpected narrative. The patron demanded replacement, the Duke continued. Perfection or nothing. But the sculptor refused. Instead, he incorporated the flaw into his design, transforming damage into distinction. The resulting piece proved more valuable for having overcome adversity. As the carriage halted before Ivy Cottage, he reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small object, the blue ribbon that had fallen from Eleanor's dress in the churchyard. Character, like art, reveals its true quality not in perfection, but in how it transforms apparent flaws. Eleanor stared at the ribbon, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You kept it." "As a reminder," he replied, returning it to his pocket, "that true value often goes unrecognized by common observers." Mrs. Langley discreetly cleared her throat. "We have arrived, Your Grace." As they descended from the carriage, the Duke addressed Mrs. Langley. "I would request permission to call tomorrow afternoon. There are matters requiring discussion." "You would be most welcome, Your Grace," she replied with perfect composure, though her eyes betrayed curiosity. Eleanor curtsied, her mind still processing the evening's dramatic reversals. "Your kindness shall not be forgotten, sir." "Nor shall the injustice you endured," he answered, his expression grave. "Rest well, Miss Vale." As the Duke's carriage departed, Mrs. Langley ushered Eleanor inside the cottage. The modest drawing-room, with its faded furniture and simple comforts, seemed a sanctuary after Blackmere Hall's gilded hostility. "You must tell me everything," Mrs. Langley insisted, removing her shawl. Eleanor sank into a chair, suddenly overcome by the evening's emotional toll. "They sought to destroy me with forged letters, intimate correspondence I never wrote. Despicable, though unsurprising," Mrs. Langley observed, pouring tea from the pot kept warming by the fire. "Lady Octavia's jealousy has festered since your arrival in the county." "Jealousy?" Eleanor accepted the teacup with grateful hands. "What cause has she for such an emotion? She possesses everything I lack: wealth, position, prospects." Mrs. Langley seated herself opposite Eleanor, her expression thoughtful. "Yet lacks everything you possess naturally: grace under pressure, genuine kindness, intellectual curiosity, and now, apparently, the attention of Alaric Pembroke." Eleanor nearly spilled her tea. "Mrs. Langley, you cannot suggest—" "I suggest nothing beyond observation," the older woman replied with a knowing smile. "The Duke of Ashbourne has demonstrated particular interest in your welfare. His request to call tomorrow further confirms it." Outside, the wind had risen, rustling through the ivy that gave the cottage its name. Eleanor placed her teacup upon its saucer with deliberate care. "His interest, whatever its nature, has now placed me at the center of a scandal that shall inevitably damage us both." Mrs. Langley studied her protégée with affectionate exasperation. "My dear, did you not hear his response? Let them talk. The Duke of Ashbourne answers to no one's judgment save his own, and perhaps the Queen's." "Even dukes must consider reputation," Eleanor countered. "Even dukes must consider happiness," Mrs. Langley replied gently. "Now, to bed with you. Tomorrow brings fresh challenges and distinguished visitors." As Eleanor retired to her small chamber, she found herself unable to dismiss the memory of the Duke's expression as he had produced her ribbon, a curious mixture of tenderness and resolve that belied his aristocratic reserve. She opened her window to the night air, gazing toward the distant hills where Ashbourne Park dominated the landscape. Somewhere within that grand estate, the Duke was perhaps contemplating the evening's events with similar disquiet. In the quiet darkness, Eleanor whispered a prayer, not for herself but for wisdom to navigate the treacherous waters that now surrounded her small vessel of dignity. As she closed the window, a letter slid beneath her door, delivered by Mrs. Langley's maid with whispered urgency. The seal bore no crest, only a plain blob of red wax. Within, a single line in unfamiliar handwriting: "Beware the Duke's true intentions. A friend." Morning brought no respite from the previous night's turmoil. Eleanor descended to breakfast to find Mrs. Langley already seated at the small oak table, a newspaper spread before her with unusual gravity. "I fear the letters were merely a prelude," the older woman stated without preamble, turning the paper to reveal a society column. "Someone has ensured broader circulation of the slander," Eleanor read with growing dismay. Though her name appeared only as Miss V, the reference to a certain clergyman's daughter, caught in correspondence of shocking intimacy with multiple gentlemen, left little doubt about the subject. The ink barely dry on their fabrication, yet already printed for public consumption, she observed, her voice remarkably steady despite the coldness spreading through her chest. "Lady Octavia works with impressive efficiency." "Or perhaps Sir Reginald," Mrs. Langley suggested. "He maintains particular connections with London journalists, useful for suppressing stories about his own indiscretions." Eleanor sank into a chair, appetite forgotten. "Regardless of the architect, the structure stands. My reputation lies in ruins, not ruins." Mrs. Langley corrected firmly. Merely under siege, and reinforcements approach, at 4 o'clock precisely, according to His Grace's note delivered at dawn. The Duke would be wiser to distance himself from such controversy, Eleanor murmured, pouring tea she had no desire to drink. Wisdom and convention rarely travel the same road, Mrs. Langley replied. Now you shall eat something, then assist me with preparations for our distinguished visitor. The day passed in domestic activity that provided blessed distraction. Floors swept, silver polished, modest refreshments arranged with careful attention. Yet beneath these ordinary rhythms, Eleanor felt the persistent tremor of impending change. At 3:30 she retreated to change her dress, the blue one being carefully sponged and pressed for another occasion. Its replacement, a modest gown of dove grey, suited her subdued mood. "You look like a watercolour rather than an oil painting," Mrs. Langley observed upon her return to the drawing-room. "Lovely in your subtlety." "Appropriate for my diminished circumstances," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "Nonsense, this temporary storm shall pass." Mrs. Langley paused as the mantel clock chimed 4, followed almost immediately by the sound of carriage wheels upon the gravelled approach. The Duke of Ashbourne arrived with characteristic punctuality, though not alone. Behind him followed a distinguished gentleman of middle years, carrying a leather portfolio. "Miss Vale, Mrs. Langley," the Duke greeted them with formal courtesy. "May I present Mr. Harding, my solicitor and trusted adviser?" Eleanor curtsied, her mind racing with speculation. The presence of a legal representative suggested matters of unexpected seriousness. Once seated with tea served, the Duke addressed the situation with characteristic directness. "The events of last evening, coupled with today's unfortunate publication, require decisive response." "Your Grace is kind to concern himself with my situation," Eleanor began, "but I fear—" "This concerns us both, Miss Vale," he interrupted gently. "The attack on your character was merely a convenient route to a different target." Mrs. Langley's eyebrows rose. "You believe yourself the ultimate object?" "Without question." The Duke's expression hardened momentarily. "Lady Octavia has made her ambitions regarding Ashbourne clear since her debut 3 seasons past. My attention to Miss Vale threatened those ambitions." Mr. Harding cleared his throat discreetly. "If I might interject, Your Grace, the legal aspects require clarification." At the Duke's nod, the solicitor opened his portfolio. "Miss Vale, these published insinuations, while carefully phrased to avoid direct libel, nonetheless constitute actionable defamation when considered alongside the forged letters." Eleanor stared at him in surprise. "You suggest legal proceedings? I suggest multiple approaches," Mr. Harding replied. "First, I have already dispatched letters to the publication demanding immediate retraction and apology. Second, we shall require access to the original letters for handwriting analysis." "Lady Blackmere will never surrender them," Mrs. Langley observed. "Perhaps not voluntarily," the solicitor acknowledged with a thin smile. "However, a formal request from the magistrate might prove persuasive." Throughout this exchange, the Duke remained silent, studying Eleanor's face with unsettling intensity. Finally, he spoke again. "These measures address the immediate slander. However, I propose a more fundamental solution." Something in his tone caused Eleanor's pulse to quicken. Mrs. Langley straightened in her chair, suddenly alert. "What solution might that be, Your Grace?" Eleanor inquired, her voice remarkably steady. The Duke leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes holding hers with unwavering focus. "Marriage." The single word fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled company. Even Mr. Harding appeared momentarily discomposed. "I beg your pardon," Eleanor managed after several heartbeats of silence. "I am proposing marriage, Miss Vale," the Duke repeated, his expression entirely serious. "A union between us would render all current slander immediately irrelevant." Mrs. Langley found her voice first. "Your Grace, while we are sensible of the honour implied, such a proposition seems precipitous." "On the contrary," he countered smoothly, "it is the result of careful consideration." Eleanor's mind reeled with conflicting emotions, astonishment, confusion, and a treacherous flicker of something dangerously akin to hope. She forced herself to speak with deliberate calm. "Your Grace, I cannot accept such a sacrifice. Your position demands a more advantageous alliance than one with a penniless clergyman's daughter." "Advantage takes many forms beyond the financial," he replied. "Intelligence, character, dignity. These qualities prove rarer than fortunes and considerably more valuable to a man in my position." Eleanor rose from her chair, moving to the window where afternoon light filtered through lace curtains. "You speak from generosity of spirit, sir, but such a decision requires reflection beyond today's crisis." The Duke exchanged glances with his solicitor, who nodded almost imperceptibly before gathering his papers. "Perhaps Miss Vale and I might speak privately," the Duke suggested to Mrs. Langley, who hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Mr. Harding and I shall inspect the garden roses," she declared, ushering the solicitor toward the door. "They bloom with particular vigor this season." Once alone, Eleanor turned from the window to face the Duke, who had also risen. The modest dimensions of the drawing room placed them in unavoidable proximity. "Your proposal honors me beyond expression," she began carefully, "but I must question its foundation. We are hardly more than acquaintances." "Are we?" The Duke's expression softened slightly. "I have observed you for longer than you realize, Miss Vale. Your conduct during your father's illness, your dedication to your brother's education, your grace under Lady Octavia's persistent cruelty, these revealed your character with greater clarity than a lifetime of drawing-room conversations." Eleanor's composure wavered. "You investigated me." "I inquired," he corrected gently. "After our first meeting in the churchyard, I wished to understand the woman who knelt in mud to place flowers on her father's grave, heedless of her only good dress." A flush of color touched Eleanor's cheeks. "You make me sound saintly. I assure you I possess the usual complement of human failings." "As do I," he acknowledged with unexpected humility. "Perhaps more than most. My position has granted me privilege without demanding corresponding wisdom." Eleanor studied him with newfound curiosity. Beyond his aristocratic bearing and formidable reputation lay something she had not anticipated: vulnerability carefully concealed beneath power. "Why me?" she asked simply. "With all of London's eligible daughters paraded before you each season, why propose to a woman whose dowry consists of 6 music students and a box of faded letters?" The Duke moved closer, stopping just short of impropriety. "Because when you speak, I hear truth rather than calculation. When you laugh, rarely I've noticed, it transforms your entire countenance. Because you value dignity above comfort and integrity above advancement." He withdrew the blue ribbon from his waistcoat pocket once more. "And because this simple thread speaks more of genuine elegance than all the diamond tiaras in Lady Blackmere's collection." Eleanor's gaze fixed upon the ribbon, such a small thing to carry such profound significance. "You offer rescue, Your Grace. Gratitude makes a poor foundation for marriage." "I offer partnership," he corrected, "and request the same in return. Ashbourne requires a mistress of substance as well as grace, someone who sees beyond its grandeur to its purpose." From the garden came Mrs. Langley's voice, deliberately raised. "The white roses appear particularly robust this year, Mr. Harding." The moment of privacy was drawing to its close. Eleanor gathered her courage for one final question. "And what of affection, Your Grace? Does that factor in your calculations?" Something flickered in his grey eyes, a warmth that belied his formal demeanour. "Affection grows where respect has prepared the soil, Miss Vale. I respected you before I knew you. I admire you now that I do. What might follow, given time and nurture?" The Duke reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. "I do not request an immediate answer, only that you consider the proposal with the same seriousness with which it is offered." He placed the box upon the pianoforte rather than directly in her hands, allowing her choice rather than pressing obligation. "3 days," he said quietly, "after which I shall call again for your response." Mrs. Langley's footsteps approached the drawing-room door. Eleanor spoke quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The world will say you married beneath you." The Duke's smile held unexpected tenderness. "The world is frequently mistaken in its judgments, Miss Vale, as we have both recently observed." The door opened to admit Mrs. Langley and Mr. Harding, ending their private conversation. The remainder of the visit passed in formal pleasantries, though undercurrents of unspoken significance charged the atmosphere. Upon their departure, Mrs. Langley turned to Eleanor with barely contained excitement. "Well, what transpired in our absence?" Eleanor's gaze remained fixed upon the small velvet box still resting upon the pianoforte. "An impossible question," she replied softly, "with 3 days to discover an answer." The small velvet box remained unopened upon Eleanor's writing desk, its presence dominating her modest chamber like a miniature monument. 2 days had passed since the Duke's extraordinary proposal, 2 days of sleepless nights and distracted days during which Eleanor had moved through her duties like a clockwork figure, her mind perpetually elsewhere. Mrs. Langley had demonstrated remarkable restraint, offering neither advice nor opinion. Some decisions, she had observed that morning over breakfast, must emerge from solitary reflection rather than collective wisdom. Now, as afternoon sunlight slanted through her window, Eleanor finally reached for the box with trembling fingers. The hinge moved silently, revealing a ring of such understated elegance it momentarily stole her breath. A single sapphire, surrounded by tiny pearls, set in white gold rather than ostentatious yellow. "Oh," she whispered to the empty room, lifting the ring to catch the light. Its beauty lay not in extravagance, but in perfect proportion and evident craftsmanship. A small folded note lay beneath it, written in the Duke's bold hand. "This belonged to my grandmother, Catherine Pembroke, who chose love above convenience. She would have approved of you." Eleanor replaced the ring carefully, closing the box with gentle precision. Tomorrow she must provide her answer, a response that would determine not only her future but potentially her brother's as well. Edwin's education at Cambridge hung perpetually by the slenderest of financial threads. A knock at her door interrupted these reflections. "Miss Vale," called the maid. "A messenger has delivered a letter for you. Most urgent," he said. Eleanor opened the door to receive a sealed envelope bearing no external identification. The handwriting matched the anonymous note she had received after the Blackmere assembly. "Beware the Duke's true intentions. A friend." Breaking the plain wax seal, she unfolded the single page within. "Miss Vale, before you answer His Grace's proposal, you should know the truth of his circumstances. The Duke of Ashbourne faces financial ruin. His estates in Cornwall were mortgaged last year to cover gambling debts, while his Italian journey was undertaken to secure loans from foreign bankers, most unsuccessfully. His sudden interest in a bride without dowry requirements becomes less flattering when viewed through this lens. The foundation he described exists only in conversation. This information comes from one who wishes to spare you disillusionment. Seek verification from his steward, Mr. Collins, who has already secured alternative employment in anticipation of the estate's collapse. A concerned friend." Eleanor sank onto her bed, the letter hanging limply from her fingers. Its contents struck with the precision of a surgeon's knife, excising hope and replacing it with cold doubt. The Duke's financial distress would explain his unorthodox proposal. A bride without expectations of grandeur, one whose gratitude might blind her to diminished circumstances. Yet something in the letter's tone rang false, its timing too convenient, its knowledge too specific. Eleanor reread it carefully, noting the emphasis on the foundation's non-existence, a detail that seemed designed to wound rather than merely inform. Rising with sudden determination, she changed quickly into her walking dress and descended to the drawing room where Mrs. Langley sat with her embroidery. "I must go into the village," Eleanor announced, reaching for her shawl. "There are inquiries I need to make before tomorrow." Mrs. Langley looked up in surprise. "Shall I accompany you?" "No," Eleanor replied, already moving toward the door. "This is something I must do alone." The village of Lower Summersley lay a mile from Ivy Cottage, a pleasant walk on fine days, though the gathering clouds suggested impending rain. Eleanor moved with purposeful strides, her mind cataloguing facts and impressions with unusual clarity. The Duke's behavior had been consistently honorable, his attention unmarked by impropriety. His proposal, while unexpected, had been presented with dignified sincerity rather than desperate urgency. Would a man facing financial collapse maintain such composure? The village solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, had served the local gentry for decades, including occasional work for Ashbourne Park. If anyone might verify the Duke's financial standing without impropriety, it would be he. His office stood at the village crossroads, a modest building distinguished by polished brass nameplates and immaculate windows. Eleanor hesitated briefly before climbing the 3 stone steps to the entrance. As a woman alone, her visit might raise eyebrows, but propriety seemed a secondary concern compared to the truth she sought. The clerk looked up in surprise as she entered. "Miss Vale, how may we assist you today?" "I wish to speak with Mr. Pemberton regarding a legal matter," she replied with calm she did not entirely feel. Moments later, she was ushered into a book-lined office where the elderly solicitor rose to greet her with professional courtesy. "Miss Vale, this is an unexpected pleasure. Please be seated." Eleanor settled into the offered chair, arranging her thoughts carefully. "Mr. Pemberton, I find myself in need of discreet information regarding a financial matter. I understand you occasionally handle affairs for Ashbourne Park." The solicitor's expression revealed nothing. "I have had that honor, yes, though the estate primarily employs London counsel for significant matters." "I seek only general information," Eleanor clarified, "specifically regarding the estate's stability." Mr. Pemberton's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Miss Vale, you must understand that client confidentiality prevents—" "I do not request specific details," she interrupted gently. "Merely confirmation of general reputation. I have received concerning information suggesting financial difficulties that might affect innocent parties." The solicitor leaned back in his chair, studying her with increased interest. "I see. And these concerns relate to you personally?" Eleanor hesitated. then nodded. They may influence decisions of considerable importance to my future. Mr. Pemberton removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully with a handkerchief. While I cannot discuss particulars, I might observe that Ashbourne remains among the most solvent estates in the country. The current Duke, unlike his predecessor, maintains exemplary financial discipline. Relief loosened the tightness in Eleanor's chest, and his recent travels abroad, they were not undertaken for financial negotiations. To my knowledge, His Grace's Italian sojourn related to art acquisition for the estate gallery, a passion inherited from his mother, the late Duchess. The solicitor replaced his spectacles. A substantial shipment arrived last month, including several Renaissance pieces of considerable value. Eleanor nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. And there exists a foundation for educational purposes, recently established? Indeed. The papers crossed my desk for review last quarter, most generously endowed. Mr. Pemberton's expression softened slightly. Miss Vale, while I cannot inquire into your specific concerns, I might observe that His Grace's reputation for integrity equals that of his financial standing. Thank you, Eleanor replied, rising from her chair. Your discretion and clarity are deeply appreciated. Outside, the threatened rain had begun, a gentle mist rather than a downpour. Eleanor turned toward Ivy Cottage, her steps lighter despite the dampening weather. The anonymous letter now revealed itself as deliberate sabotage rather than benevolent warning. As she passed the village church, the door opened to reveal Sir Reginald Pierce in earnest conversation with a thin, nervous man Eleanor recognized as a journalist from the county newspaper. Upon seeing her, Sir Reginald's expression flickered with momentary alarm before settling into calculated charm. "Miss Vale," he called, approaching with exaggerated courtesy. "What fortune to encounter you. I had intended to call at Ivy Cottage regarding the unfortunate publication, most distressing." "Indeed, Sir Reginald," Eleanor replied coolly, "though I find truth eventually emerges, however deeply buried beneath fabrication." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "One hopes so. I understand congratulations may soon be in order. News travels quickly in Somersetshire," Eleanor observed. "The Duke's interest has hardly been subtle," Sir Reginald replied, his smile not reaching his eyes, though one wonders at its durability. Aristocratic attention often proves seasonal. Eleanor met his gaze directly. "Like journalistic integrity, it seems." Before he could respond, she continued past, maintaining dignified pace despite the desire to distance herself from his presence. His involvement with the anonymous letter seemed increasingly probable, the concerned friend revealing himself as anything but friendly. Upon returning to Ivy Cottage, Eleanor found an unexpected visitor awaiting her. Lord Cedric Montrose, the Duke's closest friend and advisor, standing beside a magnificent chestnut horse. "Miss Vale," he greeted her with a formal bow. "Forgive the unannounced intrusion. I bear a message from Ashbourne." Eleanor's heart faltered momentarily. "Has something occurred?" "Nothing untoward," Lord Montrose assured her. "His Grace merely requested I deliver this personally rather than by messenger." He handed her a sealed letter bearing the Ashbourne crest. "He also asked that I await your response if convenient." Mrs. Langley appeared at the doorway. "Lord Montrose, please come inside out of this damp. Tea awaits, and Miss Vale can read her correspondence in privacy." Once settled in the modest drawing-room, Eleanor broke the Duke's seal with careful fingers. "Miss Vale, forgive this additional communication before our appointed meeting. It has come to my attention that certain parties may attempt to influence your decision through misinformation regarding my circumstances or intentions. While I would not insult your intelligence by responding to specific falsehoods, I offer this assurance: any statement presented without my seal should be regarded with appropriate skepticism. I await your answer tomorrow with respectful anticipation, whatever it may be. Yours, Alaric Pembroke, Duke of Ashbourne, P.S. Lord Montrose carries my complete confidence and may address any specific concerns should you wish to voice them." Eleanor refolded the letter, a smile touching her lips for the first time in days. The Duke had anticipated the attempt to undermine her trust, a recognition of both the stakes involved and the character of their opponents. She turned to Lord Montrose, who sat in conversation with Mrs. Langley regarding Italian architecture. "My lord, please convey my appreciation to His Grace for his thoughtfulness. I shall, as arranged, provide my answer tomorrow afternoon." Lord Montrose nodded, something approving in his expression. "Very good, Miss Vale. I believe His Grace will find your response worth the anticipation." After his departure, Mrs. Langley raised questioning eyebrows. "You seem to have reached a decision." "I have," Eleanor confirmed quietly, "though not the one our concerned friends might have hoped for." That evening, As Eleanor prepared for bed, a final delivery arrived, a small package wrapped in silver paper bearing the Ashbourne seal. Within lay a leather-bound volume of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, opened to Sonnet 43, with its famous first line, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways." A pressed violet marked the page, the same flower she had purchased for her father's grave on the day they first spoke. Eleanor closed the book, holding it against her heart as certainty settled within her like a benediction. Tomorrow's answer was already written in her soul, requiring only voice to make it manifest. Outside her window, the rain had ceased. Stars emerged between parting clouds, casting silver light upon the path that led from Ivy Cottage toward Ashbourne Park, a path soon to become familiar beneath her feet. The velvet box still waited upon her desk. Tonight she would open it once more, not to question but to affirm. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ivy Cottage's modest garden as Eleanor sat beside Mrs. Langley, awaiting the Duke's arrival. She wore her blue dress, freshly pressed, the torn ribbon replaced with one that matched the sapphire of the ring nestled in its velvet box upon the small garden table. "You seem remarkably composed for a woman about to alter her destiny," Mrs. Langley observed, adjusting her spectacles. "Not altered," Eleanor corrected softly. "Revealed, perhaps, like text written in invisible ink brought forth by proper application of heat." The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the lane. Rather than the expected carriage, the Duke arrived on horseback, alone, without groom or companion. He dismounted with fluid grace, securing his magnificent black stallion to the garden gate. "Your Grace," Mrs. Langley called, rising to greet him. "We had not expected you to travel unaccompanied. Some journeys are better undertaken without witnesses," he replied, removing his riding gloves. His gaze moved to Eleanor, who had remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. "Miss Vale, Your Grace." Her voice remained steady despite the quickening of her pulse. Mrs. Langley glanced between them, then gathered her shawl. "I believe the herbs in the kitchen garden require my urgent attention, quite urgent indeed." As she retreated toward the cottage, the Duke approached the small wrought-iron table where Eleanor sat. He remained standing, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. "I have come as promised," he stated simply. "So I observe," Eleanor replied, a smile touching her lips, though with less ceremony than one might expect for such an occasion. "I thought perhaps we had both experienced sufficient ceremony at Blackmere Hall." A wry note entered his voice. "Formality often serves as poor disguise for falsehood." Eleanor gestured toward the chair opposite her. "Please sit. There is much to discuss." The Duke complied, removing his hat and placing it upon the table. In the clear afternoon light, Eleanor noted details previously overlooked. The slight threading of silver at his temples, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting both humor and hardship. "Before you speak," he began, "I must acknowledge something. My proposal, while sincere, was precipitous, driven partly by circumstance, rather than approached with appropriate deliberation." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "Are you withdrawing your offer, Your Grace?" "No," he replied immediately, his gaze unwavering. "Merely acknowledging its imperfections. You deserve a proposal born purely of admiration, rather than complicated by external events." "Life rarely provides such pristine circumstances," Eleanor observed, "especially for a woman in my position." She reached for the velvet box, opening it to reveal the sapphire ring catching the late afternoon sunlight. "It is beautiful, and carries history within its setting. My grandmother wore it for 47 years, the Duke confirmed. She was considered eccentric for marrying a diplomat without title or significant property, yet the union proved successful, beyond conventional measure. Their correspondence during his diplomatic assignments abroad remains in the Ashbourne Library. Extraordinary letters filled with intellectual partnership and genuine affection. Eleanor closed the box gently. "I received another anonymous letter yesterday." The Duke's expression darkened. "Contents: a creative narrative regarding your financial collapse," Eleanor replied with deliberate lightness. "Mortgaged estates, desperate foreign loans, an entirely fictional foundation." "Imaginative," he remarked dryly, "though lacking originality." "The execution proved clumsy," Eleanor agreed, "particularly when compared with reality." "You investigated?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "I made inquiries," she corrected, echoing his earlier phrasing with a small smile. "Mr. Pemberton proved discreetly informative regarding Ashbourne's general standing." The Duke's expression shifted to one of approval. "Most resourceful, Miss Vale." "A woman without fortune must cultivate alternative assets," she replied, "intelligence being chief among them. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the afternoon sounds of birdsong and distant church bells. Eleanor gathered her courage for what must follow. "I have considered your proposal with the seriousness it deserves," she began carefully, "both its advantages and its considerable challenges. The primary challenge being society's reaction," he suggested. "Society I could withstand," Eleanor countered. "The greater challenge lies in discerning genuine motivation, yours and mine alike." She met his gaze directly. "Do you offer from compassion, from admiration, or from weariness with the marriage market's calculated transactions?" The Duke leaned forward slightly, his expression more open than she had yet witnessed. "All three contain elements of truth. I admire your dignity, under circumstances that would crush many. I find the marriage market's machinations increasingly intolerable, and yes, I feel compassion for injustices you have endured." He paused, then added with unexpected vulnerability, "I also offer from loneliness, Miss Vale. Privilege isolates as effectively as poverty, though in different chambers of the same prison." Eleanor's breath caught at this admission. "You surprise me with your candor, sir." "Honesty seems the only appropriate currency between us," he replied. "Insufficient though it may be." Eleanor rose from her chair, moving to the garden's edge where late roses still bloomed against the cottage wall. The Duke remained seated, allowing her this moment of contemplation. "I visited my father's grave yesterday," she said finally, her back still turned, "to seek guidance, though I know it came not from marble, but memory." "And what wisdom did you find there?" he inquired softly. Eleanor faced him once more, sunlight illuminating her features with quiet radiance. "That love begins in respect, grows through kindness, and flourishes in trust. That marriage should unite not merely circumstances, but purpose." She approached the table, retrieving the velvet box. "My answer is yes, Your Grace. I will marry you, not from gratitude, though I feel it, not from necessity, though it exists, but from belief in the possibility of a union built on mutual respect and shared values." The Duke stood, emotion briefly overcoming his aristocratic composure. He reached for her hands, enfolding them and the ring box within his own. "You honor me beyond my deserving," he said, his voice deepening with feeling. "We shall endeavor to deserve each other," Eleanor replied simply. As if choreographed by Providence itself, Mrs. Langley emerged from the cottage, carrying a tray with champagne and 3 crystal glasses, heirlooms reserved for the rarest occasions. "I observed from the kitchen window that congratulations appear to be in order," she announced with satisfaction. The Duke smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features from handsome to truly striking. "Indeed they are, Mrs. Langley. Miss Vale has consented to become my wife." "Excellent news, though hardly unexpected," she replied, setting down the tray. "The champagne has awaited this moment since yesterday morning." As they shared this modest celebration in the cottage garden, the future unfurled before Eleanor, like a path both daunting and exhilarating. Tomorrow would bring announcements, settlements, preparations, the machinery of aristocratic alliance grinding into motion. But today existed in perfect suspension, a golden moment between decision and consequence, illuminated by late afternoon light and the promise of transformation. "To new beginnings," the Duke proposed, raising his glass. "To purposeful union," Eleanor amended gently. Their glasses touched with a clear, resonant note that seemed to linger in the autumn air like a promise made manifest. In the distance, church bells began to ring for evening service, 7 chimes marking not merely the hour, but the conclusion of one chapter and the commencement of another, yet unwritten. The Duke reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, Eleanor's blue ribbon, now carefully folded. With quiet ceremony, he placed it alongside the ring box. "Our first shared treasure," he said softly. "Neither gold nor gem, yet precious nonetheless." Eleanor covered the ribbon with her fingertips, sealing their private understanding as the sunlight slowly faded from the garden, leaving them in the gentle transition between day and evening, that liminal space where all transformations truly begin. News of the engagement between the Duke of Ashbourne and Miss Eleanor Vale spread through Somersetshire with the velocity of lightning, illuminating some corners with delight and others with thunderous disapproval. By week's end, the London papers had seized upon the story, their society columns vacillating between romantic fascination and barely concealed derision. "A most unusual alliance," declared the Morning Chronicle, "between England's wealthiest bachelor and a clergyman's daughter of no particular fortune or connection." Eleanor read these accounts with detached amusement from the morning room at Ashbourne Park, where she had been installed as an honoured guest under Mrs. Langley's chaperonage until the wedding. The Duke had insisted upon immediate removal from Ivy Cottage, citing concerns for her comfort and security, following several unpleasant incidents: unsigned letters delivered by stone through windows, whispered insults in the village shop. "You display remarkable equanimity," observed Lord Montrose, who had arrived for breakfast bearing the latest publications. "The Gazette is particularly creative in its speculations regarding your mysterious enchantments." "Enchantments consisting primarily of honesty and conversation," Eleanor replied with a smile. "Powerful sorcery indeed." The Duke entered, his morning attire impeccable despite having already completed his estate rounds. "Ah, Montrose, I see you've delivered the daily anthology of impertinence." "Merely keeping your betrothed informed of her growing notoriety," his friend replied cheerfully. "Lady Jersey has reportedly declared the match incomprehensible without French novels as reference." "Lady Jersey finds arithmetic incomprehensible without assistance," the Duke remarked dryly, seating himself beside Eleanor. "Her opinion on more complex matters hardly warrants consideration." Mrs. Langley looked up from her correspondence. "The Countess of Blackmere has withdrawn her acceptance to the engagement dinner, most unexpected given her previous enthusiasm. Undoubtedly she discovered a prior commitment," the Duke replied, exchanging knowing glances with Eleanor. "Perhaps consoling her daughter, whose aspirations have required significant adjustment." A footman entered bearing a silver salver with additional letters. "The Morning Post, Your Grace, and a package for Miss Vale." Eleanor accepted the small parcel with curiosity. It bore no sending address, only her name in unfamiliar handwriting. Unwrapping the plain paper revealed a small volume, The Language of Flowers by Charlotte de la Tour. "A wedding gift, perhaps?" Mrs. Langley suggested. Eleanor opened the book to discover pressed flowers inserted between the pages: nightshade, yellow carnations, and foxglove. Her expression remained composed as she consulted the flower dictionary's entries. "Not a gift," she concluded quietly. "A message. Nightshade signifies bitter truth, yellow carnations represent disappointment, and foxglove, insincerity," the Duke finished, his expression darkening. He reached for the book. "May I?" Eleanor relinquished it, watching as he examined the volume with careful attention. "A theatrical gesture," she remarked, determined to maintain her composure, though lacking originality. "The hand appears familiar," the Duke observed, studying the direction. "Montrose, does this not resemble Sir Reginald's hasty scrawl?" Lord Montrose examined the package. "Remarkably similar, though proving authorship would prove challenging." "Proof is unnecessary for private knowledge," the Duke replied. His tone remained measured, though Eleanor noted the tension in his jaw. Sir Reginald's scheduled appearance at this evening's concert might warrant reconsideration. "Alaric," Eleanor said softly, using his given name for the first time in company. "His petty malice reveals only his own character, not our circumstances." The Duke's expression softened as he met her gaze. "Your wisdom exceeds my restraint, it seems." "Perhaps that's why you wisely chose her," Lord Montrose observed with a smile. The morning continued with discussions of wedding preparations. Despite Eleanor's preference for simplicity, certain obligations of rank necessitated compromise, a chapel ceremony followed by a reception of appropriate scale. "The settlement papers require your review," the Duke mentioned as they walked through the portrait gallery after breakfast. "Mr. Harding has prepared everything according to our discussions." Eleanor hesitated beneath the stern gaze of a previous Duke, whose painted eyes seemed to question her worthiness. "I know little of such legal matters. Hence why I've arranged for independent counsel, Mr. Pemberton, to review them with you tomorrow." The Duke stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Every provision must satisfy your understanding, as well as your interests." "My interests seem amply secured by the match itself," Eleanor observed. "Nevertheless," he insisted gently, "you must enter our marriage fully informed and properly protected. My position demands nothing less." Eleanor studied his face, the earnestness behind his aristocratic reserve. "You continue to surprise me." "I should hope to do so for decades to come," he replied with unexpected warmth. Their moment of private connection ended as Mrs. Langley approached with the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, to discuss household arrangements. Eleanor soon found herself immersed in the complexities of managing an estate with 47 indoor servants and nearly 200 outdoor staff. "The responsibility seems immense," she confessed to Mrs. Langley later that afternoon as they reviewed household ledgers in the morning room. "You possess the necessary intelligence and character," her friend assured her. "The rest comes with experience and judicious delegation." Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Lady Catherine Harrington, the Duke's maternal aunt, and a formidable dowager whose opinion carried significant weight in London society. "I wish to meet the young woman who has captured my nephew's attention so thoroughly," she announced without preamble, after the briefest courtesies. Her piercing gaze assessed Eleanor from head to toe. "The newspapers mention beauty, yet fail to capture your particular quality." "I believe the quality you seek to identify is sincerity, Lady Harrington," Eleanor replied calmly. "A characteristic newspapers rarely recognize, having limited acquaintance with it." The elderly woman's eyes widened momentarily before her stern mouth relaxed into something approaching approval. "Impertinent, but accurate. Alaric mentioned your directness. I find it refreshing after a lifetime of sycophants." The Duke himself appeared in the doorway, alerted to his aunt's arrival. "Aunt Catherine, what an unexpected pleasure." "Unexpected indeed, since my invitation apparently lost its way to Sussex," she retorted with asperity. "I learned of your engagement through the Times rather than family correspondence. An oversight soon to be remedied," he replied smoothly, kissing her cheek. "We are delighted you've come." "I arrived to inspect, not celebrate," Lady Harrington clarified, though her tone held more curiosity than censure. "A duke's marriage affects more than personal happiness. It influences alliances, properties, and bloodlines." Eleanor maintained her composure beneath this frank assessment. "All considerations, Your Grace, undoubtedly weighed before proposing, along with the more essential question of character," the Duke added pointedly. Lady Harrington studied their interaction with shrewd attention. "You defend each other already. Interesting." The afternoon progressed through layers of veiled interrogation, interspersed with reminiscences of the Duke's childhood, stories that revealed dimensions of Alaric Pembroke previously unknown to Eleanor. The boy who had rescued injured birds, the young man who had defended tenant farmers against his father's harsher policies. "He possesses his mother's heart beneath his father's formidable exterior," Lady Harrington observed as they toured the rose garden, "a combination requiring particular understanding." "I believe understanding begins with observation rather than assumption," Eleanor replied, "a principle sadly neglected in fashionable circles." The older woman's eyebrows rose. "I speak from experience, from recent observation," Eleanor corrected gently. "My position has provided unexpected perspective on society's judgments." By dinner, Lady Harrington's initial skepticism had transformed into guarded approval. As they gathered in the drawing room afterward, she beckoned Eleanor to sit beside her on a damask settee. "My nephew's choice, while unconventional, appears more considered than I initially feared," she stated in lowered tones. "However, you must prepare for significant challenges. Society forgives aristocratic men almost anything, except marriages that threaten its carefully cultivated exclusivity." "I anticipate resistance," Eleanor acknowledged quietly, "though I confess the intensity has surprised me." "Because you underestimate your power," Lady Harrington replied with unexpected candor. "A duke marrying for character rather than connection suggests merit might outweigh bloodline, a dangerous precedent for those whose only value lies in inheritance." The evening concluded with Lady Harrington's announcement that she would remain until the wedding, a declaration that carried the dual purpose of social endorsement and practical support. As Eleanor prepared for bed in her temporary chambers, a gentle knock preceded the Duke's entrance, a brief visit made acceptable by Mrs. Langley's presence in the adjoining dressing room. "You've conquered the formidable Lady Harrington," he observed with a smile. "No small achievement." "We reached mutual understanding," Eleanor clarified. "She loves you beneath her formidable exterior." The Duke approached, stopping at a proper distance, his expression softening. "Tomorrow we review the settlement papers. The day following we announce the formal date. Events move quickly now." "Like a novel approaching its conclusion," Eleanor observed. "Or its true beginning," he countered gently. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue, a token to replace today's unwelcome delivery. Within the tissue lay a sprig of white heather, preserved and bound with silver thread. "Protection," Eleanor identified, her knowledge of flower language proving useful and wishes fulfilled. "Both my intentions precisely," the Duke replied softly. Their eyes met in silent communication, a language developing between them that required neither dictionary nor translation, built upon the foundation of mutual respect and growing affection. Outside the window, stars emerged in the clear autumn sky, distant yet brilliant, like possibilities glimpsed but not yet reached, promises made but not yet fulfilled. The Duke bowed formally before taking his leave. "Rest well, Miss Vale. Tomorrow brings us one day closer to a new chapter." "Good night, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, the heather sprig held gently between her fingers, a talisman against uncertainty, a promise of protection in the challenging days ahead. As the door closed behind him, Eleanor moved to the window, gazing toward the extensive grounds of what would soon become her home. Responsibility loomed large, yet purpose burned brighter. The opportunity to transform position into positive influence, privilege into genuine service. The estate stretched before her like the blank pages of an unwritten story, awaiting the impression of a new hand alongside its master's established authority, a collaboration just beginning to find its voice. Morning sunshine illuminated the library of Ashbourne Park, where Eleanor sat beside Mr. Pemberton, reviewing the marriage settlement papers with careful attention. The Duke had absented himself purposefully, instructing the solicitor to explain every clause without reservation or consideration of his interests. "His Grace has been uncommonly generous," Mr. Pemberton observed, indicating a particularly detailed section. "This provision for your personal income exceeds standard aristocratic settlements by a considerable margin." "It seems excessive," Eleanor remarked, studying the figures with slight discomfort. "My needs have always been modest." "Our Duchess requires independent means appropriate to her position," the solicitor replied. "Furthermore, your brother's education and establishment have been secured in perpetuity." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Edwin's situation was not part of our discussions." "Nevertheless, His Grace insisted upon these provisions." Mr. Pemberton adjusted his spectacles. "The young man's university costs, subsequent legal training, and initial chambers have been arranged through a separate trust." Emotion tightened Eleanor's throat. The Duke had anticipated her deepest concern without her voicing it, ensuring Edwin's future would never again hang by the thread of financial uncertainty. "There is another matter," Mr. Pemberton continued, removing a separate document from his portfolio. "His Grace has reinstated the Vale family property in Northumberland, a modest estate forfeited to the Crown during your grandfather's difficulties. It will be held in trust for any children of the marriage, with lifetime occupancy rights for your brother should he require a country residence." Eleanor stared at the document in astonishment. "I was unaware such property existed. Father never spoke of it." "The circumstances of its loss likely proved painful," Mr. Pemberton suggested gently. "The Duke made discreet inquiries upon learning your family name." The library door opened, admitting Lady Harrington with a rustle of expensive silk. "Are the tedious but necessary legal proceedings progressing satisfactorily, Mr. Pemberton?" "Most efficiently, my lady," the solicitor replied, rising with a respectful bow. "Excellent. I require a private word with the future Duchess, if you might spare her." Once alone, Lady Harrington seated herself opposite Eleanor, her aristocratic features arranged in uncharacteristic solemnity. "My nephew has informed me of the unfortunate incidents following your engagement announcement. The poison pen letters, the flower dictionary insult, unpleasant but hardly unexpected," Eleanor replied with hard-won composure. "Such tactics reflect desperation rather than power," Lady Harrington observed. "However, you should prepare for more sophisticated opposition once you enter London society." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "I anticipate a difficult reception." "Difficult? My dear, difficult scarcely encompasses what awaits." Lady Harrington's directness held no cruelty, merely pragmatism. "You will encounter barriers invisible until encountered, judgments whispered rather than declared, and exclusions arranged with exquisite subtlety. Yet you believe I should proceed nonetheless?" "Absolutely." The older woman's eyes gleamed with unexpected fervor. "Society requires periodic disruption to prevent complete ossification. Your marriage to Alaric provides precisely such opportunity." A knock preceded Mrs. Langley's entrance. "Forgive the interruption, but Miss Vale has a visitor, most insistent despite being informed of her engagement in legal matters." "Who calls with such urgency?" Lady Harrington inquired with raised eyebrows. "Lady Octavia Blackmere," Mrs. Langley replied, her expression revealing her opinion of this development. Eleanor exchanged glances with Lady Harrington, whose mouth tightened disapprovingly. "The young woman demonstrates remarkable audacity. Shall you receive her?" "With appropriate witnesses," Eleanor decided after brief consideration. "Some conversations prove more productive with proper observation." Lady Octavia awaited them in the small reception room, her golden curls arranged beneath a fashionable bonnet, her expression a careful mask of social correctness. She rose as Eleanor entered, accompanied by both Mrs. Langley and Lady Harrington. "Miss Vale," she greeted with a curtsy notably shallower than proper. "How adaptable you appear in your new surroundings." "Lady Octavia," Eleanor acknowledged calmly, "this is an unexpected call." "Circumstances occasionally necessitate unconventional actions," the younger woman replied, her gaze sliding momentarily toward Lady Harrington before returning to Eleanor. "I had hoped for a private conversation." Privacy seems an unlikely courtesy given recent events, Eleanor observed. Lady Octavia's composure faltered briefly before she regained her practiced smile. Perhaps you refer to the unfortunate misunderstanding at my mother's assembly, a regrettable confusion regarding certain letters. Indeed, Eleanor replied neutrally. Most regrettable. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Lady Octavia spoke again, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. Miss Vale, I wonder if you fully comprehend the consequences of your current position. The challenges awaiting you extend beyond Somersetshire's limited boundaries. I believe Miss Vale understands her situation perfectly, Lady Harrington interjected coolly, though perhaps not the purpose of your visit, which remains unclear. Lady Octavia straightened, something calculating entering her expression. I merely wish to ensure Miss Vale enters her new life with complete awareness. Certain aspects of the Duke's character and history might prove illuminating before final arrangements are concluded. Eleanor maintained her composure, though her heart quickened at this transparent threat. How considerate of you to concern yourself with my enlightenment. Consideration motivates many actions, Lady Octavia replied with dangerous sweetness, including my discretion regarding certain incidents from His Grace's past that society might find disturbing. Lady Harrington rose to her full impressive height. Lady Octavia, you now approach the boundary of slander, a legal matter with consequences beyond social embarrassment. I speak only from concern, the younger woman protested, though her eyes betrayed triumph at having provoked reaction. Miss Vale deserves complete understanding of the man she intends to marry, his former attachments, his behavior in less visible circles. Eleanor stood, gathering dignity around her like a cloak. Lady Octavia, your concern is noted, though its sincerity remains questionable. If you possess information you believe relevant to my future happiness, perhaps you might address it directly to His Grace. Men rarely welcome such discussions, Lady Octavia replied with affected sadness, particularly regarding former affections and their consequences. Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened to admit the Duke himself, his expression hardening as he registered Lady Octavia's presence. I was informed of an unexpected visitor, he stated, his tone revealing careful restraint, though not her identity. Lady Octavia executed a deep curtsy, her demeanor transforming instantly to one of practiced charm. Your Grace, how fortunate to encounter you. I was just expressing my congratulations to Miss Vale. Indeed, the Duke's skepticism remained undisguised. Your previous communications suggested different sentiments entirely. A flush colored Lady Octavia's cheeks. Misunderstandings occasionally arise during emotional circumstances, particularly when orchestrated with deliberate precision, he countered, his gaze unwavering. Lady Octavia, while we acknowledge your visit, I believe its purpose has been adequately fulfilled. The dismissal, though cloaked in courtesy, left no room for negotiation. Lady Octavia gathered her reticule with fingers that trembled slightly. Of course, I have detained Miss Vale too long from her preparations. Her gaze swept the room with calculated assessment. London awaits news of this unexpected alliance with considerable interest. London's interest rarely outlasts its attention span, Lady Harrington observed dryly. A fortnight hence, some new scandal will captivate the gossips. After Lady Octavia's departure, Eleanor released a breath she had not realized she was holding. She came to threaten, not congratulate. Her desperation grows increasingly transparent, the Duke remarked, his expression troubled. Though her references to my past require address. Eleanor glanced toward Mrs. Langley and Lady Harrington, who exchanged meaningful looks before tactfully withdrawing, leaving the engaged couple in relative privacy. The door left properly ajar, yet conversation rendered reasonably confidential. You need not explain yourself, Eleanor began, but the Duke shook his head. On the contrary, Lady Octavia alludes to specific incidents that, while distorted through her perspective, contain enough substance to warrant clarification. He gestured toward a nearby settee. Please. Once they were seated, at proper distance, he continued with characteristic directness. During my third season in London, I formed an attachment to Lady Caroline Huxley, daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland. We were briefly engaged. Eleanor nodded, maintaining composure despite the unexpected revelation. I see. The engagement ended by mutual agreement when her affections turned toward Lord Benchley, whom she subsequently married. His expression remained neutral, though Eleanor detected a shadow of old pain. Society, preferring scandal to simplicity, created elaborate narratives around the dissolution. And Lady Octavia believes these narratives might dissuade me from our match? She likely refers to rumors that I broke the engagement due to gambling losses or mercenary considerations. A sardonic smile touched his lips. Neither contains truth, though both proved persistent. Eleanor studied his face, finding only openness where she had feared evasion. "Thank you for your candor. There is one additional matter," he continued reluctantly. "My father's final years included indiscretions that caused my mother considerable pain. Society occasionally assigns hereditary tendencies in such matters." Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. "Lady Octavia implies you might follow similar patterns." "A convenient insinuation, though without foundation," he confirmed. "My parents' marriage served as instructive counterexample rather than model." Eleanor reached across the small distance between them, briefly touching his hand, a gesture both improper and perfect. "I judge present character rather than past circumstance or others' conduct." The Duke's expression softened with something approaching wonder. "Your capacity for direct understanding continually surprises me, perhaps because society rarely values clarity above artifice," she suggested. Their conversation ended as Mrs. Langley discreetly returned, bearing a message regarding final arrangements for tomorrow's engagement dinner, the formal announcement of their wedding date to selected guests. That evening, as Eleanor dressed for dinner in a gown newly arrived from London, dark blue silk with modest lace trim, Mrs. Langley assisted with her hair. "Lady Octavia's visit has unsettled you," her friend observed, securing a simple pearl pin, "though you concealed it admirably." "Not the visit itself," Eleanor clarified, "but its implications. She clearly believes herself possessed of information that might disrupt our engagement." "Desperation rarely produces credibility," Mrs. Langley reminded her. "The Duke has addressed her insinuations directly. What remains to fear?" Eleanor met her friend's eyes in the mirror's reflection. "Not fear, precisely. Rather, awareness of how public our private happiness must become, subject to speculation, distortion, and judgment beyond our control." "The price of prominence," Mrs. Langley acknowledged, adjusting a final curl. "Though prominence brings opportunity alongside scrutiny." The dinner that evening proceeded with elegant simplicity, family members and close associates gathering in anticipation of tomorrow's larger celebration. Lord Montrose raised his glass in the first formal toast. "To the Duke of Ashbourne and his chosen bride, may their union prove as substantive as it is surprising, as enduring as it is noteworthy." Eleanor accepted the congratulations with growing confidence, Lady Harrington's quiet approval providing unexpected reinforcement. The Duke remained attentive without hovering, present without imposing, a balance that suggested promising partnership rather than mere possession. As the evening concluded, he escorted her to the foot of the grand staircase, where propriety dictated their separation until morning. "Tomorrow brings our first significant public appearance," he observed quietly. "Lady Octavia will undoubtedly attend, along with others who view our engagement with similar sentiments. Then we shall face them together," Eleanor replied with newfound certainty. "Their disapproval affects only our comfort, not our convictions." The Duke's expression warmed with appreciation. "You continue to demonstrate remarkable fortitude, Miss Vale." "Perhaps," she suggested with a small smile, "because I have discovered something worth defending." Their eyes held momentarily, a private communion amid the public setting. Then, with perfect correctness, he bowed over her hand before releasing it to Mrs. Langley's chaperonage. As Eleanor ascended the staircase, she felt his gaze following, not with possessiveness, but with something far more profound. Recognition of equal worth despite unequal circumstance. Appreciation of character beyond conventional value. Tomorrow would bring challenges, both anticipated and unexpected. Yet tonight she climbed toward her chambers, with steps lighter than circumstance might warrant, buoyed by the growing certainty that their unusual alliance contained genuine foundation beneath its controversial exterior. The future stretched before her, uncertain yet promising, daunting yet beckoning, like the grand staircase itself. Each step requiring courage, each elevation offering expanded perspective, the summit yet unseen, but increasingly attainable. Behind her, the Duke remained at the foot of the stairs until she disappeared from view, a silent sentinel marking both her departure and her eventual return, patience personified in aristocratic form. The ballroom of Ashbourne Park glowed with the light of 100 candles, their golden illumination reflecting from crystal chandeliers and polished silver. Distinguished guests from across the county had gathered for the official engagement celebration, their curiosity barely disguised beneath practiced social manners. Eleanor stood beside the Duke at the entrance to the grand space, greeting arrivals with composed dignity. Her gown, a gift from Lady Harrington, was cream silk embroidered with silver thread, elegant without ostentation. "You appear remarkably serene," the Duke murmured between introductions. while I find myself uncharacteristically tense, perhaps because you better understand what awaits," Eleanor replied softly. "I remain blissfully ignorant of proper aristocratic expectations, a distinct advantage," he observed with a brief smile. The Countess of Blackmere arrived with Lady Octavia, both women executing flawless curtsies while their eyes remained cold as January frost. Sir Reginald Pierce followed shortly thereafter, his handsome features arranged in careful neutrality that did not quite conceal his underlying bitterness. "Your Grace," he greeted with an elegant bow. "Miss Vale, my congratulations on your unexpected happiness." "Thank you, Sir Reginald," the Duke replied, his tone perfectly cordial though his gaze remained vigilant. "Your presence honors us." Once the formal receiving line concluded, musicians began the first selection, a stately processional rather than dance music, signaling the commencement of dinner. The Duke offered Eleanor his arm, leading her toward the dining room where 60 guests would be seated according to precise hierarchical arrangement. "Remember," he murmured as they approached the imposing double doors, "you enter not as guest, but as future mistress. This house becomes your domain in 3 weeks' time." Eleanor drew strength from his quiet confidence, lifting her chin imperceptibly as footmen opened the doors to reveal the magnificent table gleaming with silver, crystal, and fresh floral arrangements. Dinner progressed through multiple courses, conversation flowing with practiced ease among the aristocratic guests. Eleanor found herself seated between Lord Harrington and the local magistrate, both gentlemen treating her with careful courtesy tinged with evident curiosity. "You must find Ashbourne Park quite different from your previous circumstances, Miss Vale," observed the magistrate, Sir William Porter, between courses. "Indeed," Eleanor acknowledged with composure, "though perhaps less in essentials than appearances might suggest." "How so?" he inquired, clearly surprised by her response. "Responsibility remains constant regardless of scale," she replied. "Whether managing a modest household or an extensive estate, the principles of stewardship, care for dependents and attention to detail remain unchanged." Sir William's expression registered newfound consideration, a most practical perspective. From farther down the table came Lady Octavia's carefully pitched voice. "One wonders how Miss Vale shall adapt to the expectations of London society. The transition from giving music lessons to presiding over ducal entertainments presents quite the educational challenge." The deliberate pause before educational infused the word with subtle mockery. Several faces turned toward Eleanor, awaiting her response to this thinly veiled provocation. "Indeed, Lady Octavia," Eleanor replied with perfect composure, "education proves valuable throughout life's transitions. Fortunately, a willingness to learn often compensates for advantages of earlier instruction." Lady Harrington's approving nod was nearly imperceptible, though the slight tightening around Lady Octavia's mouth suggested the counterthrust had found its mark. The Duke, observing from the table's head, raised his glass in a subtle gesture of support before addressing the gathering. "Distinguished guests, your presence honors both Miss Vale and myself as we announce our wedding date, the 15th of next month at St. George's, Hanover Square." Polite applause followed, though Eleanor noted several exchanged glances of surprise at the prestigious London venue. The announcement firmly established the marriage as a significant social event rather than a hasty provincial ceremony. "St. George's," murmured Sir Reginald to his dinner companion, his voice carrying just far enough. "How ambitious for a match that many expected to occur with greater discretion." The Duke's gaze shifted toward him, expression cooling noticeably. "Some matters deserve celebration rather than concealment, Sir Reginald, particularly those built upon genuine esteem rather than calculation." The remainder of dinner proceeded with superficial harmony, though Eleanor remained acutely aware of undercurrents beneath the polished conversation. As ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, while gentlemen lingered over port, she found herself momentarily separated from Mrs. Langley's protective presence. Lady Octavia seized the opportunity, approaching with 2 companions, young women whose expressions mirrored her own barely disguised hostility. "Miss Vale, we wondered if you might enlighten us regarding your preparations for London. Have you engaged a proper lady's maid? Selected appropriate jewels? The season demands particular attention to such details." "My arrangements progress satisfactorily," Eleanor replied with deliberate vagueness, "though I welcome any specific recommendations you believe beneficial. One hesitates to offer advice where it might appear presumptuous," Lady Octavia countered with false modesty. "Though perhaps a warning might prove acceptable, London society devours provincial pretensions with particular relish." Before Eleanor could respond, Lady Harrington's authoritative voice interrupted. Having personally introduced 3 daughters and 7 granddaughters to society, I believe Miss Vale's presentation falls within my particular expertise, Lady Octavia. Your concern, while noted, proves unnecessary. The younger woman retreated with murmured apologies, though her expression suggested the skirmish merely postponed rather than concluded. Lady Harrington guided Eleanor toward a quieter corner of the drawing-room. "You maintained admirable composure," the older woman observed, "though greater challenges await in London. I anticipate them with appropriate trepidation," Eleanor acknowledged. "Trepidation serves little purpose," Lady Harrington replied firmly. "Strategic preparation proves considerably more effective. We shall commence tomorrow." When gentlemen rejoined the gathering, the Duke moved immediately to Eleanor's side, his expression revealing concern. "Lady Octavia attempted unpleasantness?" "Attempted being the operative word," Eleanor assured him with a small smile. "Your aunt proved a formidable defender." The remainder of the evening progressed through carefully orchestrated entertainment, music, conversation, the formal announcement of wedding details. Throughout, Eleanor maintained her quiet dignity, despite the scrutiny that followed her every movement and word. As guests departed well past midnight, the Duke found a moment of relative privacy to speak with his betrothed near the grand staircase. "You navigated a veritable minefield with remarkable grace," he observed, genuine admiration warming his voice. "The first of many, I suspect," Eleanor replied with hard-won insight, "though perhaps the most significant, as impressions formed tonight will travel throughout the county by tomorrow." "Let them travel," the Duke replied with unexpected fervour. "Let all of England know that Alaric Pembroke chose character over convention, substance over spectacle." Eleanor studied his face in the candlelight, the aristocratic features animated by emotion, rarely displayed in public settings. "You risk much for principles, Your Grace." "I risk nothing compared to what I gain," he countered softly. Their conversation ended as propriety demanded, yet the exchange lingered in Eleanor's thoughts as she prepared for bed, the Duke's words suggesting that their unusual alliance had transformed from strategic arrangement to something approaching genuine partnership. Outside her window, a quarter moon illuminated the formal gardens of what would soon become her home. Responsibility loomed large in the silvered landscape, yet purpose burned brighter. The opportunity to transform position into meaningful influence, privilege into genuine service. Tomorrow would bring Lady Harrington's promised strategic preparation. The day after, meetings regarding household management and estate obligations. The path ahead stretched demanding yet clear, a course requiring courage, wisdom, and unwavering integrity. As sleep finally claimed her, Eleanor's last conscious thought was not of doubt, but determination. Society might whisper, challenge, or condemn, yet ultimately could not diminish what truly mattered, the commitment to build something worthy upon the foundation of mutual respect and growing affection. The future awaited, not merely to be endured, but embraced. St. George's Church on Hanover Square stood resplendent in autumn sunshine, its elegant Georgian architecture providing perfect backdrop for what London's social circles had deemed the season's most unexpected alliance. Carriages lined the square, their aristocratic occupants filing into the sacred space with expressions ranging from genuine pleasure to barely concealed skepticism. Within a private antechamber, Eleanor stood before a mirror as Mrs. Langley adjusted her veil, a creation of Brussels lace that had adorned Lady Pembroke at her own wedding decades earlier. Her gown, ivory silk embellished with seed pearls, combined simplicity with undeniable elegance. "You appear the very image of a duchess," Mrs. Langley observed, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Your father would have been immensely proud." "I hope so," Eleanor replied softly, though he might have found today's grandeur somewhat overwhelming. The door opened to admit Lady Harrington, resplendent in lavender silk and ancestral diamonds. "The congregation has assembled. Half of London society appears determined to witness this incomprehensible match, as Lady Jersey continues to term it. Their curiosity serves our purpose," the older woman continued briskly. "Better to face scrutiny directly than allow speculation to flourish unchallenged." The past 3 weeks had transformed Eleanor under Lady Harrington's exacting tutelage, not changing her essential nature, but armoring it appropriately for the battles ahead. From protocol to precedence, household management to social obligations, the education had been intensive and unyielding. "Remember," Lady Harrington instructed, adjusting a final fold of the veil, "you enter not as supplicant, but as chosen companion. Your carriage establishes expectations that will follow throughout your marriage." Eleanor nodded, gathering her composure as organ music swelled from the main church, the signal that proceedings would shortly commence. In the absence of her father, Lord Montrose had offered to escort her down the aisle, a gesture that acknowledged both her personal circumstance and the Duke's closest friendship. He appeared now, resplendent in formal attire, his expression warm with genuine regard. "Miss Vale, you are a vision of elegance. My friend is a fortunate man indeed. Your kindness has made this day possible," Eleanor acknowledged, accepting his offered arm. "I shall not forget it." They processed toward the main sanctuary, pausing at the threshold as hundreds of faces turned to observe her entrance. Eleanor recognized many from recent London introductions, aristocrats whose initial frosty reception had gradually yielded to grudging acceptance under Lady Harrington's formidable sponsorship. The Duke awaited at the altar, his tall figure commanding in formal attire, his expression transforming as he beheld his bride. The naked emotion that briefly crossed his features, visible to all assembled, silenced many whispers more effectively than any proclamation could have done. Eleanor moved forward with measured steps, her gaze fixed upon her future husband rather than the critical observation surrounding them. The journey seemed simultaneously eternal and instantaneous, each step carrying her further from her previous life toward an uncharted future. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient words and solemn promises. Eleanor's responses emerged clear and unwavering, her hand steady, as the Duke placed his grandmother's sapphire ring alongside the gold band upon her finger. "With this ring, I thee wed," he declared, the traditional words carrying personal weight that transformed formal declaration into intimate covenant. When the bishop pronounced them husband and wife, a subtle shift occurred within the congregation, something approaching collective acceptance, if not yet wholehearted endorsement. The Duke of Ashbourne had indeed married a clergyman's daughter without fortune or connection, a reality now established beyond speculation or denial. The wedding breakfast that followed at Ashbourne House, the family's London residence, assembled 200 of society's most prominent figures. Eleanor moved through the gathering with newly acquired confidence, accepting congratulations with composed grace that gradually disarmed even the most skeptical observers. "For you navigate these waters with remarkable skill," Lord Harrington commented, as she paused briefly between conversations. "One would scarcely believe you had not been born to such circles." "Perhaps because genuine interest in others transcends social boundaries," Eleanor suggested. "People respond to sincere attention regardless of circumstance." Across the magnificent ballroom, she observed Lady Octavia and her mother in conversation with Sir Reginald, their expressions suggesting dissatisfaction rather than celebration. The Countess had attended out of social necessity rather than goodwill, her congratulations delivered with palpable insincerity. The Duke appeared at Eleanor's side, his hand resting briefly at the small of her back, a gesture both proper and intimate. "You have charmed Lord Liverpool completely," he observed with quiet pride, no small accomplishment considering his notorious resistance to social pleasantries. "We discussed educational reform rather than the weather," Eleanor replied. His perspectives proved unexpectedly progressive. "You see?" The Duke's expression warmed with genuine pleasure. "Already your influence extends beyond expectation." As the lengthy celebration progressed toward evening, Edwin approached his sister during a rare moment of relative privacy. Now in his final year at Cambridge, he had matured into a thoughtful young man whose future in law seemed increasingly assured. "I hardly know how to address you," he confessed with a mixture of pride and bemusement. "My sister has become Your Grace overnight." "I remain Eleanor regardless of titles," she assured him, squeezing his hand affectionately. "Though circumstances have certainly altered beyond imagination." "Father would be astonished," Edwin acknowledged, "yet ultimately pleased, I believe. The Duke's character speaks for itself." Their conversation ended as Lady Harrington approached, signaling the time for Eleanor's departure to change into travelling clothes. The ducal couple would journey to Pembroke Castle in Wales for their wedding trip, a fortnight of privacy before assuming the full weight of social and estate obligations. In the Duchess's chambers, a suite decorated in pale blue silk that matched the Ashbourne sapphires now adorning Eleanor's throat, Mrs. Langley assisted with the transformation from bride to traveller. "You have accomplished the impossible," her friend observed, securing Eleanor's hat. "Married for genuine affection within the highest circles, accepted if not yet embraced by society, positioned to effect meaningful change rather than merely ornament ballrooms." "The accomplishment belongs to many," Eleanor corrected gently. "Your friendship, Lady Harrington's guidance, the Duke's unwavering support, all contributed to today's outcome." When she descended the grand staircase in her travelling ensemble, a pelisse of deep blue velvet over a gown of silver-grey silk, the Duke awaited in the entrance hall. His expression as she approached contained such evident admiration that several observers exchanged knowing glances. "My Duchess," he greeted her, the simple title conveying layers of private meaning beyond its public significance. "My Duke," she responded with equal simplicity, accepting his offered arm. They departed amid traditional good wishes and scattered rose petals, entering the magnificent travelling carriage bearing the Ashbourne crest. As the vehicle pulled away from the London residence, Eleanor glanced back at the assembled well-wishers, a tableau of aristocratic propriety now irrevocably altered by her presence within their ranks. The Duke reached for her gloved hand, his expression softening into rare vulnerability. "Regrets?" he inquired softly. Eleanor turned from the window to meet his gaze directly. "None," she replied with quiet certainty, "though I confess to wondering what comes next in this most unusual story." "The most significant chapters," he assured her, bringing her hand to his lips in a gesture both formal and tender, "those written together rather than separately." As London receded behind them, Eleanor felt boundaries dissolving, between past and future, expectation and possibility. The woman she had been and the Duchess she would become. The road ahead stretched unknown yet promising, a journey commenced with courage and conviction, guided by mutual respect and deepening affection. Society's whispers would undoubtedly continue. Challenges would arise, adjustments would be required. Yet in this moment, as autumn sunlight gilded the landscape and her husband's hand remained steady within her own, Eleanor Vale Pembroke, Duchess of Ashbourne, faced forward with unwavering certainty, not merely of position achieved but of purpose discovered. Spring sunlight streamed through the long windows of Ashbourne Park's morning room, illuminating Eleanor as she reviewed correspondence at her writing desk. 6 months had passed since her wedding day, months of adjustment, challenge, and unexpected fulfillment. A discreet knock preceded Mrs. Winter's entrance. "Your Grace, the plans for tomorrow's tenant celebration await your approval." Eleanor accepted the documents with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. And has Lady Harrington's arrival been confirmed?" "Indeed, Your Grace. Her ladyship's message indicates she shall arrive by noon." Once alone again, Eleanor moved to the window overlooking newly planted gardens, her first significant alteration to the estate's landscape. Beyond the formal beds, construction continued on what would soon become the Ashbourne Foundation School for Young Women, her most ambitious project, supported wholeheartedly by her husband. The door opened without preliminary knock, announcing the Duke himself. "Good morning, Duchess," he greeted, crossing to press a kiss upon her forehead, a liberty only permitted in private. "You've returned earlier than expected," Eleanor observed, genuine pleasure warming her voice. "Was Parliament less contentious than anticipated?" "Equally contentious but more efficiently resolved," he replied, settling into a chair beside her desk. "Lord Liverpool has incorporated your suggestions regarding the education initiative." Eleanor's expression brightened with surprised satisfaction. "Truly, I had thought them too progressive for immediate consideration." "Your arguments proved persuasive, even in second-hand delivery," the Duke remarked with evident pride. "Perhaps next session you might consider attending the Ladies' Gallery yourself." "A Duchess in Parliament?" Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "Society barely tolerates my management of estate charities." "Society's tolerance expands with exposure," he countered, "as demonstrated by Lady Jersey's remarkable change of heart following your successful musical evening." Eleanor smiled at the memory of that pivotal evening 3 months earlier, her first major entertainment as Duchess of Ashbourne. The program, featuring young female musicians of modest circumstances, had initially raised aristocratic eyebrows, yet ultimately won approval through undeniable artistic merit. "Speaking of society," she ventured, "I received an interesting letter this morning." She handed him correspondence bearing an Italian postmark. The Duke scanned its contents, his expression shifting from curiosity to sardonic amusement. "So Sir Reginald has established himself in Florence," he observed, "and Lady Octavia has followed despite her mother's objections. Apparently they were wed by special license last month," Eleanor confirmed. "The Countess refuses acknowledgement, considering the match beneath her daughter's dignity." "Ironic, given her previous ambitions," the Duke remarked dryly, "though one hopes they find contentment despite motivations that appear more vengeful than affectionate." Eleanor gathered scattered papers into neat stacks. "The London house preparations are complete for next week's journey. Lady Harrington suggests we host a small dinner before the Berkshire ball, strategic introductions for several political connections." "Always calculating influence," the the Duke observed, with affectionate exasperation. My aunt views society as a battlefield requiring constant strategic deployment. Her strategies have proven effective, Eleanor acknowledged. Without her guidance, my reception might have proved considerably more challenging. The Duke rose, moving to stand behind Eleanor's chair, his hands resting lightly upon her shoulders. Your own character has accomplished what no strategy could enforce. Authenticity eventually distinguishes itself from artifice. Eleanor leaned briefly against his supportive presence, a moment of vulnerability permitted only in private. The anniversary celebration for the tenants tomorrow will mark 6 months since our wedding. Sometimes it seems both longer and shorter. A paradox of happiness, he suggested. Time simultaneously expanded and compressed by meaningful occupation. Their conversation paused as a footman arrived with additional correspondence, including a substantial package from Eleanor's brother Edwin, now established in promising chambers through the Duke's connections. He writes with enthusiasm about the Vale property restoration, Eleanor noted as she scanned his letter. The legacy you reclaimed for him, for us, the Duke corrected gently. Our family's future extends beyond Ashbourne alone. The simple pronoun, our, contained worlds of meaning that Eleanor absorbed with quiet gratitude. From separate existences, they had forged genuine partnership, their union transcending its controversial beginnings to establish something neither could have created independently. Rising from her desk, Eleanor moved toward the bell to order refreshments. As she passed her husband, he caught her hand in a gesture that had become habitual between them, momentary connection amid busy days. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his waistcoat pocket. A small token for tomorrow's anniversary. He placed in her palm a small velvet pouch. Opening it carefully, Eleanor discovered a locket of exquisite craftsmanship, gold filigree surrounding a central sapphire that matched her wedding ring. Open it, he encouraged softly. Within the locket lay a small blue ribbon, the same one that had fallen from her dress during their first meeting in the churchyard, carefully preserved despite its humble origin. Our beginning, the Duke explained simply, preserved alongside our continuing journey. Eleanor closed her fingers around the precious object, emotion momentarily preventing response. When she finally spoke, her voice carried gentle certainty. Who could have imagined such transformation when they laughed at the clergyman's daughter without dowry? Their mockery became the first step toward unexpected joy. Not merely joy, the Duke amended, his expression serious despite its underlying tenderness. Purpose shared, influence amplified, legacy extended beyond either of us alone. From the window came sounds of construction, the school taking shape stone by stone, its existence transforming the estate from mere possession to active instrument for change. Tomorrow we celebrate with the tenants, Eleanor observed. Next week we return to London. The seasons advance, carrying us forward into territories yet unexplored. The Duke's smile held both affection and anticipation. I can imagine no more worthy companion for such exploration. As afternoon sunlight gilded the room, casting their shadows in elongated harmony across polished floors, Eleanor contemplated the journey from marketplace humiliation to ducal partnership. Society had warned she would never marry without dowry, yet here she stood, not merely married, but purposefully united with a man who valued character above convention. She touched the locket now hanging around her neck, feeling the slight outline of the ribbon preserved within, humble origin of profound transformation. Shall we walk to the construction site? She suggested. I believe the library foundations are being laid today. Lead on, Duchess, her husband replied, with the smile reserved solely for her. I follow wherever you guide. Together they departed the morning room, their steps aligned in perfect rhythm, partnership embodied in simple movement, shared purpose manifest in common direction. Behind them, Eleanor's writing desk remained covered with evidence of meaningful occupation, charitable accounts, educational plans, correspondence with influential figures previously beyond her reach. Before them stretched decades of possibility, their unusual union having already begun to reshape expectations beyond Ashbourne's boundaries, not merely a love story, but a legacy unfolding. True worth lies not in wealth or status, but in character and dignity. Society's judgments, though powerful, cannot diminish genuine integrity. When authentic virtue meets recognition, transformative change becomes possible, not just for individuals, but for the world they touch. What begins as mockery may become the foundation for profound purpose when courage, respect, and genuine affection align. Did you enjoy this tale of dignity triumphing over society's cruel judgments? Subscribe to receive more captivating Victorian romances where love overcomes every obstacle. Leave a comment sharing your favorite moment from Eleanor and the Duke's journey from scandal to celebration. What other impossible love stories would you like to see unfold in the elegant but unforgiving world of aristocratic England?